Sarah Mitchell's worn sneakers squeaked against the linoleum floor of Murphy's Diner as she balanced 3 plates on her left arm, coffee pot in her right hand. The morning rush was brutal, and her tip jar looked depressingly empty. She had no idea that buried beneath a handful of crumpled dollar bills was something that would transform her life forever. A diamond wedding ring worth more than she made in 6 months, left behind by a stranger whose grief had made her careless. What Sarah chose to do with that ring would open doors she never knew existed, leading to a conversation that would change everything for her and her 7-year-old daughter. But could one act of honesty really bridge the gap between a struggling single mother and the world of luxury she'd only seen from the outside? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button for more real, emotional, life-changing stories like this, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Sarah wiped down table 6 for the 3rd time that morning, her movements automatic after 18 months of working at Murphy's Diner. The breakfast crowd had thinned out, leaving behind the usual debris of syrup-sticky plates and coffee rings on the faded Formica tables. Her daughter Emma would be getting out of school in 6 hours, and Sarah's babysitter, Mrs. Rodriguez, charged by the hour, every minute eating into the meager tips that kept them afloat. "Order up," called Gus from behind the grill, his gruff voice cutting through the ambient noise of sizzling bacon and clinking dishes. Sarah grabbed the plates, 2 eggs over easy with hash browns for the trucker in booth 3, and hustled over with practiced efficiency. The man barely looked up from his newspaper as she set down his food, grunting a thanks that came without eye contact or acknowledgement of her existence. This was her reality, the invisible dance between server and served, where she existed in the background of other people's lives while struggling to keep her own together. The rent was due in 5 days, and even with her tips from the weekend, she was still $40 short. The thought made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety as she returned to the counter where her small plastic tip jar sat, looking pathetically sparse with its collection of ones and loose change. As she began counting the bills, her fingers brushed against something hard and smooth at the bottom of the jar. She pulled out what appeared to be a ring, but as she held it up to the light, her breath caught in her throat. The diamond caught the harsh fluorescent lighting and threw tiny rainbows across the dingy walls of the diner. This wasn't costume jewelry or some cheap trinket. This was the real thing, a substantial solitaire set in what looked like platinum or white gold. Sarah's hands trembled as she examined the ring more closely. The band was worn smooth in places, suggesting years of constant wear, and inside she could make out an engraving, though the script was too small to read clearly. Someone had been wearing this ring for a long time, someone who valued it enough to have words inscribed inside the band. Her first instinct was to call out to the diner, to ask if anyone had lost a ring, but the morning crowd had already dispersed, leaving only the trucker who was now paying his bill at the register. "Hey, Gus," she called to the cook, holding up the ring. "Did you see anyone acting like they'd lost something this morning? Looking around on the floor or checking their pockets?" Gus glanced over, his weathered face squinting at the sparkle in her hand. "Holy hell, Sarah! Where'd you find that thing?" "In my tip jar. Someone must have dropped it in by accident." "That's some accident," Gus whistled low. "That thing's got to be worth more than we make in a year. You sure you didn't just find your retirement plan?" The suggestion hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She'd be lying if she said the thought hadn't crossed her mind. $40 short on rent, Emma needing new shoes, the car making that grinding noise that meant expensive repairs were coming. This ring could solve all of those problems and more. But as she looked at the worn band and thought about the person who had treasured it enough to have it engraved, she knew there was only one thing she could do. "Someone's probably heartbroken right now," she said, slipping the ring into her apron pocket. "I need to find who it belongs to." Gus shook his head, returning to his grill. "You're a better person than most, Sarah Mitchell. Hope whoever lost it appreciates what they're getting back. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine tasks, but Sarah's mind kept returning to the ring in her pocket. Every time she reached for her order pad or wiped down a table, she could feel its weight, a constant reminder of the trust that had accidentally been placed in her hands. During her break, she pulled it out again and tried to make out the inscription, holding it at different angles to catch the light. The words were definitely there, elegant script that spoke of love and permanence, but she couldn't quite make them out. As closing time approached, Sarah found herself hoping against hope that someone would return looking for the ring. She'd rehearsed the conversation in her mind, the relief and gratitude on the person's face when she produced their precious jewelry from her apron. But 5 o'clock came and went with no frantic customers, no one retracing their steps or calling the diner in desperation. "You heading out?" asked Marie, the evening waitress who was taking over for the dinner shift. Sarah nodded, untying her apron and grabbing her purse from behind the counter. "Marie, if anyone comes in asking about a lost ring, call me immediately, okay? Day or night, I don't care what time it is." Marie raised an eyebrow. "What kind of ring we talking about?" Sarah pulled the ring from her pocket one more time, watching Marie's eyes widen as the diamond caught the light. The kind that someone's going to be desperate to find. The drive to pick up Emma from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment gave Sarah time to think. The ring felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket, and she found herself checking the rearview mirror as if someone might be following her, demanding their property back. The rational part of her mind knew she was being paranoid, but the weight of carrying something so valuable, something that clearly meant everything to someone else, was almost overwhelming. Emma bounced into the car with her usual 7-year-old energy, chattering about her day at school and the art project they were working on. Sarah listened with half her attention, the other half consumed by the moral dilemma sitting heavy in her apron pocket. How do you explain to a child that sometimes doing the right thing means passing up something that could change your life? "Mommy, you're being quiet," Emma observed as they pulled into their apartment complex parking lot. "Are you sad about something?" Sarah turned off the engine and looked at her daughter, this beautiful, perceptive little person who'd become her entire world since Emma's father had walked out when she was just 2 years old. Emma had her father's dark hair but Sarah's green eyes, and right now those eyes were filled with concern that no 7-year-old should have to feel for their parent. "Not sad, baby. Just thinking about something that happened at work today. Good thinking or bad thinking?" Sarah smiled despite herself. Emma had a way of cutting through complexity with the simple wisdom that only children possessed. "Good thinking, I hope. Someone lost something very important, and I found it. Now I need to figure out how to give it back to them." Emma nodded solemnly. "Like when I found Mrs. Chin's cat and we put up posters?" "Exactly like that, but a little more complicated." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table with her laptop, a magnifying glass she'd borrowed from Emma's detective kit, and the ring. Under the bright desk lamp, she could finally make out the inscription, "Forever, my love, 1967. The words sent a chill through her, confirming what she'd suspected. This wasn't just an expensive piece of jewelry. It was someone's symbol of eternal love, worn for over 50 years. Sarah began her search methodically, starting with the obvious places. She posted on the local Facebook community groups, describing the ring in vague terms and asking anyone who had lost jewelry to contact her with specific details. She called the other businesses near the diner, the dry cleaner, the hardware store, the small grocery market, asking if anyone had come in looking for a lost ring. By 10 o'clock, she'd exhausted her immediate options with no results. The inscription gave her a clue about the ring's age, but 1967 could represent a wedding year, an anniversary, or any number of significant dates. Sarah found herself staring at the ring, wondering about the story it held. Who had worn it for all these years? Why had they taken it off? And how had it ended up in her tip jar? The next morning brought no answers. Sarah arrived at the diner early, hoping someone might have returned overnight or called Gus with questions about a lost ring. But the morning rush proceeded normally, with no frantic customers or mysterious phone calls. Sarah found herself studying each customer more closely, looking for signs of someone who might be missing a precious piece of jewelry. The businessman who ordered his eggs scrambled. Was he checking his pockets more than usual? The woman in the floral dress who sat alone by the window, did she keep looking at her bare ring finger? "You're making me nervous with all that staring," Gus commented during a lull. "People are going to think you're planning to poison their coffee." "I'm trying to figure out who might have lost the ring," Sarah explained. "Someone had to be in here when it happened. Could have been any time in the last few days," Gus pointed out. "You don't clean out that tip jar every night." Sarah's heart sank as she realized he was right. The ring could have been sitting at the bottom of her jar for days, accumulating bills and coins on top of it. The trail was already cold, and getting colder with each passing hour. On her break, Sarah walked the length of Main Street, checking with every business owner about a lost ring. At Henderson's jewelry store, old Mr. Henderson examined the ring with his jeweler's loupe, whistling softly at what he saw. "This is a fine piece," he said, his voice reverent. 2 carats, excellent clarity, probably worth about $15,000. The setting is vintage, 1960s style, and this inscription—" He paused, reading the words through his magnifying glass. "This tells a story of real love. $15,000. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. That was more money than she made in 8 months of working at the diner. It was Emma's college fund, a new car, security and stability she'd never known. And she was actively trying to give it away. "Any chance you sold this ring originally?" she asked, though she knew Henderson's had only been in business for about 10 years. Henderson shook his head. "No, but I might be able to help you track down the owner. Rings like this often have documentation, insurance papers, appraisals. If someone's missing a ring this valuable, they've probably called every jeweler in the county by now." But Henderson's phone hadn't rung with any desperate calls about lost jewelry, and neither had any of the other jewelry stores Sarah contacted. As the days passed with no leads, Sarah found herself carrying the ring everywhere, afraid to leave it at home, but equally afraid to keep it at work. The weight of it seemed to increase with each passing day, the moral burden growing heavier as her financial situation remained precarious. Emma noticed her mother's distraction over dinner on Friday night. They were eating mac and cheese again, the 3rd time that week, because it was cheap and filling and Emma liked it well enough not to complain. "Mommy, did you find the person who lost their thing yet?" Sarah looked up from her barely touched food. She'd been thinking about the ring again, wondering if she should take out an ad in the newspaper or expand her search to neighboring towns. "Not yet, sweetheart, but I'm still looking. What if they don't want it back?" Emma asked with 7-year-old logic. What if they threw it away on purpose? The thought had occurred to Sarah, but the inscription and the obvious value of the ring suggested otherwise. This wasn't something someone discarded lightly. "I don't think they threw it away, Em. I think they lost it by accident and they're probably very sad about it." "Like how I felt when I lost my stuffed rabbit at the park?" "Probably even sadder than that." Emma nodded gravely. "Then we have to keep looking. Mr. Bunny meant everything to me." Sarah smiled, remembering the frantic search through the park, checking every bench and playground until they found the beloved stuffed animal wedged under the slide. Emma's joy at being reunited with Mr. Bunny had been worth every minute of searching. Somewhere out there, someone was missing this ring with that same desperate longing. The breakthrough came on Monday morning, not from Sarah's systematic searching, but from pure chance. Margaret Whitmore walked into Murphy's diner at exactly 9:47 a.m. ordered black coffee and wheat toast, and sat in the corner booth with a newspaper she didn't read. Sarah noticed her immediately because the woman kept touching her bare ring finger, a gesture so unconscious yet telling that it made Sarah's heart race. Margaret was probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and clothes that spoke of quality and careful maintenance. Her coat was wool, well tailored but not new, and her handbag was leather that had aged gracefully. Everything about her suggested someone who valued craftsmanship and permanence, someone who would treasure a ring inscribed with words of eternal love. Sarah approached the table with the coffee pot, her hands trembling slightly as she refilled the cup that was already full. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you lost anything recently? Anything important?" Margaret looked up, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. For a long moment she didn't speak, and Sarah worried she'd overstepped, made an assumption based on nothing more than a nervous gesture. "Why do you ask, dear?" Sarah glanced around the diner, making sure they couldn't be overheard, then sat down across from Margaret without being invited. It was against every rule of restaurant service, but something told her this was the moment she'd been waiting for. "Because I found something, and I think it might belong to someone who's been missing it very much." Margaret's hand went immediately to her bare ring finger, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she'd found the ring's owner. The older woman's eyes filled with tears, and her voice shook when she spoke. "You found my ring?" Sarah reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the small jewelry box she'd borrowed from Henderson's, the one that properly displayed the ring's beauty and significance. She placed it on the table between them and watched as Margaret's composure finally cracked completely. "Oh, my God," Margaret whispered, her hands shaking as she picked up the ring. "I thought it was gone forever. I've been retracing my steps for a week, calling every place I went, checking lost and found departments. How did you know it was mine?" "The way you kept touching your ring finger," Sarah said softly. "And you looked like someone who was missing something precious." Margaret slipped the ring back onto her finger, and the transformation was immediate. She seemed to become whole again, the missing piece restored to its rightful place. "I took it off to wash my hands in your restroom last week. I set it on the sink edge and completely forgot about it until I was halfway home. When I came back 20 minutes later, it was gone." "It must have fallen off the sink and someone turned it in," Sarah said, though she knew that wasn't quite true. The ring had found its way into her tip jar through some chain of events she'd probably never understand fully. "I offered a $500 reward," Margaret continued, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I posted notices everywhere, hired a private investigator. This ring," she held up her hand, admiring the way the diamond caught the light. "My husband gave this to me on our wedding day in 1967. We were married for 49 years before he passed away 6 months ago. It's all I have left of him, the only thing that makes me wow." "Be like he's still with me." Sarah felt her own eyes fill with tears as she understood the full weight of what she'd been carrying. This wasn't just an expensive piece of jewelry, it was Margaret's connection to a lifetime of love, her tangible link to the man who had been her partner for nearly 5 decades. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Sarah said, meaning every word. "I can't imagine how frightening it must have been to lose something so precious." Margaret reached across the table and took Sarah's hands in hers. "You don't understand, dear. You could have kept this ring. No one would have known. No one would have blamed you. But you chose to find me, to give back something that means more to me than my life itself. There aren't words to express my gratitude." "Anyone would have done the same thing," Sarah said, though she knew that wasn't necessarily true. "No," Margaret said firmly. "No, they wouldn't have. You have no idea how rare that kind of integrity is, especially when you're struggling financially. Sarah started to protest that she wasn't struggling, but Margaret held up a hand to stop her. "Dear, I've been watching you work. I see how carefully you count your tips, how you eye the prices on the menu when you think no one is looking. I recognize the look of someone doing everything they can to keep their head above water because I've been there myself." The accuracy of Margaret's observation left Sarah speechless. She'd thought she was hiding her financial stress better than that. "My husband and I didn't start with money," Margaret continued. "We built everything from nothing, one careful decision at a time." He used to say that character is what you do when no one is watching, when no one would know if you made the easy choice instead of the right choice. You, my dear, have extraordinary character. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the praise, unsure how to respond to such genuine gratitude. "I just did what felt right." "Exactly," Margaret smiled. "That's what makes it so remarkable." She opened her purse and pulled out an envelope thick with cash. "I want you to have the reward money. $500 as promised." Sarah stared at the envelope, thinking about Emma's shoes, the rent, the car repairs. $500 would solve immediate problems and give her breathing room she desperately needed. But taking money for returning something that was never hers to keep felt wrong somehow. "I can't accept that," she said finally. "I didn't return your ring for a reward. I returned it because it belongs to you." Margaret studied Sarah's face for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. "What's your name, dear?" "Sarah." "Sarah Mitchell." "Well, Sarah Mitchell, I have a proposition for you. But first, tell me about yourself. Do you have family? Children?" Something in Margaret's tone suggested this was more than casual conversation, but Sarah found herself opening up to this stranger who had become something more through their shared experience with the ring. "I have a daughter, Emma." "She's 7. We live in Maple Gardens, the apartment complex over on Pine Street. I've been working at the diner for about a year and a half, ever since we moved here from Phoenix." "What brought you to our little town?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to share, but Margaret's eyes were kind and genuinely interested, not judgmental or prying. "Fresh start, I guess." Emma's father left when she was 2, and Phoenix held too many memories. "I thought a smaller town might be better for raising her. Safer, more community-oriented." "It has been, mostly. People here are good, but the opportunities are limited." "What did you do before the diner?" "I worked in hotel management, actually. Started as front desk staff and worked my way up to assistant manager at a resort in Scottsdale. I loved it. The problem solving, making sure guests had everything they needed, coordinating between different departments to create perfect experiences." Margaret's eyes lit up with interest. "That's quite a leap from hotel management to waiting tables." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out most of my experience was at smaller, family-owned places that don't carry much weight when you're applying to bigger hotels. And with Emma, I needed something with reliable hours and immediate income. The diner provided that." "But you miss it? The hotel work?" "Every day," Sarah admitted. "There's something magical about hospitality when it's done right. You're not just providing a service, you're creating moments, memories, experiences that people carry with them forever." "At the resort, I used to help coordinate proposals, anniversary celebrations, family reunions. I loved being part of those special moments in people's lives." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet my son. His name is David, and he owns the Grand Harbor Hotel downtown. Perhaps you've seen it?" Sarah certainly had seen it. The Grand Harbor was the most elegant building in their small city, a beautifully restored Victorian mansion that had been converted into a luxury boutique hotel. She'd driven past it countless times. admiring its manicured gardens and wondering what it would be like to work somewhere so beautiful. "He's been looking for a new hospitality director," Margaret continued. "Someone with experience and instincts. Someone who understands that true hospitality comes from the heart, not just training manuals. Would you be interested in meeting with him?" Sarah felt like the world had tilted off its axis. I don't understand." "You're offering me a job interview because I returned your ring?" "I'm suggesting a meeting because returning my ring showed me who you are as a person. The hotel business isn't really about managing rooms and coordinating services. It's about understanding people, anticipating their needs, and caring enough to go above and beyond expectations. You did that for me when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose." "But I don't have experience with luxury hotels." "The places I worked were nice, but nothing like the Grand Harbor." "Experience can be taught," Margaret said. "Integrity cannot. Character cannot. The instinct to do right by people cannot. Those are the qualities that make someone truly exceptional in hospitality, and you've already proven you have them." Sarah's mind raced with possibilities and fears in equal measure. This felt too good to be true, too much like a fairy tale. What if I'm not qualified? What if I disappoint him? What if you're exactly what he's been looking for? Margaret countered. What if this is your chance to get back to work you love while providing a better life for your daughter? The offer was tempting beyond belief, but Sarah had learned to be cautious about opportunities that seemed too good to be true. "Can I think about it?" "Of course." Margaret smiled. "But don't think too long." David is interviewing candidates this week, and I'd hate for him to settle for someone who checks all the boxes on paper but lacks the heart for true hospitality. They exchanged phone numbers, and Margaret promised to call David that afternoon to arrange a meeting. As she prepared to leave, she pressed the envelope of reward money into Sarah's hands despite her continued protests. "Consider it an advance on your first paycheck," Margaret said with a wink. "And Sarah? Thank you. You've given me back more than a ring today. You've given me back my faith in humanity." After Margaret left, Sarah sat in the empty booth for a long time, staring at the envelope in her hands and trying to process what had just happened. Gus appeared with a cup of coffee and slid into the seat across from her. "That looked like an intense conversation," he observed. "Good news about the ring?" "She was the owner," Sarah confirmed. "A widow who lost her husband 6 months ago." The ring was her wedding ring from 1967. Gus whistled low. "That she was grateful to get it back." "More than grateful. She offered me a job." "Doing what?" Sarah looked up at Gus, the scruff man who had become something of a father figure to her over the past 18 months. "Managing hospitality at her son's hotel." "The Grand Harbor." Gus's eyebrows shot up. "The fancy place downtown?" "Sarah, that's huge." "That's life-changing money. If I'm qualified, if I don't mess it up, if it's even real." "It's real," Gus said firmly. "That woman didn't strike me as someone who makes promises lightly." "And you're more qualified than you think. I've watched you handle every kind of customer we get in here, from truckers having the worst day of their lives to businessmen who think they're too good to eat at a place like this. You treat everyone with respect and dignity, you solve problems before they become bigger problems, and you make people feel welcome. That's hospitality." Sarah felt tears threatening again. What if I'm making a mistake? What if I should just be grateful for what I have, instead of reaching for something that might not work out? What if you don't try and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? Gus countered. "Sarah, I've seen a lot of people come through here, and most of them are stuck because they're afraid to take chances." "Don't be one of those people." That evening, Sarah told Emma about Margaret and the ring and the potential job opportunity. Emma listened with the serious attention she reserved for truly important conversations. asking thoughtful questions about what the job would involve and whether they would have to move again. "Would you like working at a fancy hotel?" Emma asked as Sarah tucked her into bed. "I think I would love it," Sarah admitted. "It's the kind of work I've always wanted to do, helping people have special experiences and making sure everything is perfect for them." "Then you should do it," Emma said with 7-year-old certainty. "You're really good at making people happy, Mommy." Remember when Mrs. Rodriguez was sad about her cat being sick, and you made her that soup and sat with her? And when I was scared about starting school here, you made it into an adventure instead of something scary? Sarah smiled, amazed as always by her daughter's wisdom. "You think I should take the chance?" "I think chances are just opportunities wearing scary masks," Emma said solemnly. "That's what you told me when I was afraid to try out for the school play." Margaret called the next morning while Sarah was getting ready for her shift at the diner. David could meet with her that afternoon if she was available, at the hotel so she could see the operation firsthand. "What should I wear?" Sarah asked, suddenly panicked about making a good impression. "I don't have interview clothes for a place like that." "Wear something that makes you feel confident," Margaret advised. "David is more interested in who you are than what you're wearing. But if it would make you feel better, there's a lovely boutique called Sophia's just down the street from the hotel. Tell them I sent you, and they'll help you find something appropriate." Sarah arrived at Sophia's with 30 minutes to spare and a budget of exactly $50 from her tips. The owner, a stylish woman in her 50s, took one look at Sarah and seemed to understand immediately what was needed. "Job interview?" she asked kindly. "The most important one of my life," Sarah admitted. "Then let's make sure you feel like the remarkable woman you are." 20 minutes later, Sarah barely recognized herself in the dressing room mirror. The navy blue dress was simple but elegant, professional but not stuffy, and it fit her perfectly despite coming off the rack. The woman had also insisted on lending Sarah a string of pearls and matching earrings. "Margaret Whitmore is one of my dearest friends," she explained when Sarah protested the loan. "If she thinks you're special enough to recommend to David, then you're family as far as I'm concerned." The Grand Harbor Hotel was even more impressive up close than Sarah had imagined. The Victorian architecture had been lovingly restored, with intricate woodwork and stained glass windows that caught the afternoon sunlight. The lobby was elegant without being ostentatious, furnished with antiques that looked comfortable rather than museum-like. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, and soft classical music played in the background. Sarah announced herself to the front desk clerk, a young man who seemed genuinely pleased to see her. "Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. He's in the conservatory. I'll take you right back." The conservatory turned out to be a glass-enclosed room filled with plants and comfortable seating overlooking the hotel's gardens. David Whitmore stood as Sarah entered, and she was struck immediately by how much he resembled his mother. He had the same kind eyes and warm smile, the same presence that suggested someone who genuinely cared about others. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming on such short notice. My mother told me about your kindness in returning her ring, and I have to say, I was impressed before we even met." David gestured for Sarah to sit in one of the comfortable chairs, and instead of conducting a formal interview across a desk, he joined her in the sitting area with 2 cups of tea already prepared. "I hope you don't mind Earl Grey," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "It's become something of a tradition here, afternoon tea with potential team members. I find people are more themselves when they're comfortable." Sarah accepted the tea gratefully, using the moment to steady her nerves and really look at her surroundings. Everything about the space suggested attention to detail and genuine care for guest experience. The tea was perfect, served in delicate china with small pastries she was too nervous to try. "Tell me about yourself, Sarah," David said, his tone conversational rather than interrogative. "My mother mentioned you have experience in hotel management, but I'm more interested in what draws you to hospitality." "Work." Sarah took a sip of tea and found herself relaxing despite her nerves. There was something about David's manner that invited honesty and openness. "I love the moment when everything comes together perfectly for a guest," she began. "When someone is celebrating an anniversary and you make sure their room has champagne and flowers waiting, or when a business traveler is having the worst day and you solve their problem before they even know they have one. There's something magical about being part of people's important moments, making sure their experiences are everything they hoped for." David nodded encouragingly. "Can you give me a specific example?" Sarah thought back to her time in Phoenix, remembering a situation that had challenged every skill she possessed. "We had a family reunion booked for 30 people, 3 generations celebrating a grandparent's 80th birthday. The week before they arrived, their original venue canceled due to a kitchen fire. They called us desperate and heartbroken, certain their celebration was ruined. We didn't have event space available, but I worked with our restaurant manager to create a private dining experience. We moved furniture around, brought in additional tables, coordinated with a local florist for decorations, and arranged for a local baker to create a custom cake. The grandmother later told me it was the most beautiful celebration they'd ever had, better than what they originally planned." "What was the most challenging part of making that happen?" "Convincing everyone it was possible," Sarah admitted. "The restaurant manager didn't think we could accommodate 30 people. The housekeeping staff wasn't sure about the furniture arrangements. The kitchen was worried about the special menu. I had to help everyone see the solution instead of focusing on the obstacles." David smiled. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need here. The Grand Harbor isn't just a hotel. It's a place where people come to celebrate life's most important moments. Weddings, anniversaries, family reunions, business achievements. Our job is to make those moments perfect, even when, especially when, that requires us to think creatively." They talked for another hour, covering Sarah's experience, her approach to problem solving, her ideas about guest service. David asked thoughtful questions that revealed as much about his management style as they did about Sarah's qualifications. He clearly valued collaboration, creativity, and genuine care for people who have a rigid adherence to corporate policies. "I'd like to show you around the hotel," David said eventually. "See what you think of our operation." The tour was revelatory. Every detail had been considered, from the way rooms were appointed to maximize both comfort and beauty, to the staff training that emphasized anticipating guest needs rather than simply responding to them. Sarah found herself asking questions, offering observations, suggesting small improvements that could enhance the guest and guest experience even further. "You see things differently than most people," David observed as they finished the tour in his office. "Most candidates focus on systems and procedures. You see possibilities and connections." "I suppose I think about what I would want if I were the guest," Sarah said. "What would make me feel special? What would turn a good experience into an unforgettable one?" David leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with the same assessing look his mother had used in the diner. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. I've interviewed 8 candidates for this position, all with impressive resumes and excellent references. But none of them understood what we're really trying to do here. They saw a job managing a hotel. You see an opportunity to create experiences that matter to people." Sarah's heart began to race, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. "The position is hospitality director," David continued. "You'd oversee guest services, event coordination, and staff training. You'd work directly with me to maintain and improve our service standards, and you'd have significant input into how we develop the guest experience. The salary is $65,000 annually, plus performance bonuses and full benefits including health insurance and retirement contributions." $65,000? Sarah tried to keep her composure, but the number was almost incomprehensible. It was more than double what she made at the diner, enough to provide Emma with opportunities Sarah had only dreamed of. I'd also like to offer you a signing bonus of $5,000 to help with your transition, David added. Moving from one job to another can be financially stressful, and I want you to be able to focus on learning your new role rather than worrying about bills. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked rapidly to keep them at bay. I don't know what to say. This is more than I ever hoped for. Say yes, David smiled. Say you'll help us make the Grand Harbor the kind of place where people create memories that last a lifetime. Yes, Sarah whispered, then cleared her throat and said it again with more strength. Yes, I would be honored to accept the position. David stood and extended his hand, which Sarah shook with as much composure as she could manage. Welcome to the Grand Harbor family, Sarah. I have a feeling you're going to transform this place in ways we haven't even imagined yet. As Sarah walked back through the hotel lobby, everything looked different somehow. This wasn't just a beautiful building anymore. It was her workplace, her professional home. The place where she would build a career worthy of Emma's pride. The front desk clerk smiled and waved as she passed, and Sarah realized that these people would soon be her colleagues. Her team. The drive back to pick up Emma felt surreal. 2 hours ago, Sarah had been a struggling single mother working for tips at a diner. Now she was the hospitality director of the most prestigious hotel in the city, with a salary that would change everything about their lives. The transformation was so dramatic it felt like a dream. And she kept checking her purse to make sure the employment contract David had given her was really there. Emma was waiting on Mrs. Rodriguez's front steps. Her backpack slung over one shoulder and her face lit up with excitement about something that had happened at school. When she saw Sarah's expression, her chatter stopped mid-sentence. Mommy, you look different. Happy different. Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, taking her daughter's small hands in hers. Baby, remember how we talked about chances being opportunities wearing scary masks? Emma nodded solemnly. Well, I took off the mask today, and what I found underneath was the most beautiful opportunity. I got the job at the fancy hotel. Emma's eyes went wide. The one where you help people have special times? Exactly that one. And this job is going to change things for us. Good things. Really good things. Emma threw her arms around Sarah's neck, squeezing tight. I'm proud of you, Mommy. You were brave even when you were scared. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah called her sister Jessica in California. They'd grown apart since Emma's father left, partly due to distance, and partly because Jessica had never quite understood Sarah's decision to leave Phoenix and start over in a small town. You're kidding me, Jessica said after Sarah finished explaining about the ring, Margaret, and the job offer. This actually happened? It's not some elaborate scam? I start Monday morning, Sarah laughed. I have the contract, I've met the team, I've seen the hotel. It's real, Jess. My little sister, the hotel executive, Jessica mused. You know, I always thought you were crazy for leaving Phoenix, but maybe you were right all along. Maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you're really meant to do. Sunday night, Sarah lay awake thinking about her last shift at Murphy's Diner, which had ended just hours earlier. Gus had been characteristically gruff about her departure, muttering about how he'd never find another waitress who could handle the breakfast rush like she could. But when the evening crowd had thinned out, he'd pulled her aside with an envelope containing her final tips, plus an extra $100 he claimed were back tips he'd forgotten to give her. You take care of that little girl, he'd said, his voice rougher than usual. And don't forget about us regular folks when you're rubbing elbows with the rich and famous. Marie had been more openly emotional, hugging Sarah tightly and making her promise to visit often. Even some of the regular customers had wished her well, including the trucker who usually barely acknowledged her existence. "Heard you're moving up in the world," he'd said, leaving a $20 tip on a $12 meal. "Good for you. Takes guts to chase something better." Now, as Sarah prepared for sleep, she thought about the strange chain of events that had led her to this moment. If Margaret hadn't absent-mindedly left her ring by the sink, if someone else had found it instead of Sarah, if Sarah had made the easy choice to keep it rather than spend days tracking down its owner, none of this would have happened. The ring had been more than a test of character. It had been a catalyst for transformation. Sarah's first day at the Grand Harbor began at 8 in the morning with a staff meeting in the hotel's conference room. David introduced her to the department heads, a group of experienced professionals who welcomed her with genuine warmth. There was Patricia, the front desk manager who had worked in hospitality for 20 years. Roberto, the head of maintenance who knew every inch of the hotel's Victorian infrastructure. And Catherine, the executive housekeeper whose attention to detail was legendary among guests. "Sarah comes to us with extensive hotel experience and a natural instinct for exceptional guest service," David told the group. "She'll be working closely with all of you to maintain our standards while looking for ways to enhance the guest experience even further." The first week was a whirlwind of learning, observing, and gradually taking on responsibilities. Sarah shadowed Patricia at the front desk, learning the computer systems and guest management protocols. She spent time with Roberto understanding the building's quirks and capabilities for event setups. She worked with Catherine to understand how housekeeping standards contributed to the overall guest experience. But it was during her time with the events coordinator, a harried woman named Linda who was clearly overwhelmed by her workload, that Sarah began to see her first opportunity to make a real contribution. "We have the Morrison wedding next Saturday," Linda explained, shuffling through a stack of papers that seemed to multiply every time Sarah looked at them. 40 guests, ceremony in the garden, reception in the rose room. Simple enough, except the bride wants white roses and the florist we usually use doesn't have enough white roses available. She's having a complete meltdown about it. Farah studied the event details, thinking about the problem from the bride's perspective. A wedding was supposed to be perfect, and for many brides, every detail mattered enormously. What if we used white roses for the ceremony where they'll be most visible, and then incorporated other white flowers for the reception? White peonies, white hydrangeas, white lilies? We could create arrangements that are even more beautiful than all roses, more varied and interesting. Linda looked skeptical. The bride specifically requested white roses. But what she really wants is her wedding to be beautiful and perfect, Sarah suggested. If we can show her arrangements that are more stunning than what she originally planned, she might be even happier with the result. Sarah spent her lunch break calling local florists, not just looking for white roses, but exploring alternatives. She found a florist in the next town who specialized in mixed white arrangements and was excited about the creative challenge. By the end of the day, she had photographs of potential arrangements that were breathtaking, far more sophisticated and elegant than simple white roses. When Linda called the bride with the alternative proposal, the response was immediate and enthusiastic. Not only did the bride love the new floral concept, she increased her order to include additional arrangements for the cocktail hour. "How did you think of that?" Linda asked after hanging up the phone. "I thought about what would make me happiest if I were the bride," Sarah explained. "It's not really about the specific flowers. It's about feeling like your wedding is the most beautiful day of Taplas. Your life." Word of Sarah's problem-solving approach spread quickly through the hotel staff. When the restaurant manager was struggling with a menu request from a guest with multiple food allergies, Sarah suggested creating a custom tasting menu that turned the restrictions into an opportunity to showcase the chef's creativity. When a business conference organizer was frustrated by audiovisual equipment limitations in the meeting rooms, Sarah worked with Roberto to find innovative solutions that actually improved the setup beyond what the original equipment could have provided. 3 weeks into her new position, Sarah received her first paycheck. The direct deposit notification on her phone showed a number that still seemed impossible: $4,847.23 after taxes and deductions. It was more money than she'd made in her best 3 months combined at the diner. That evening, Sarah took Emma to a real grocery store, not the discount market where they usually shopped. They walked through aisles filled with fresh produce, quality meats, and name-brand items that had been luxuries before. "Can we really buy whatever we want?" Emma asked, her eyes wide as she looked at the abundance surrounding them. "Within reason," Sarah smiled. "We can buy good food, healthy food, things we enjoy instead of just things we can afford." Emma chose fresh strawberries, something they'd only bought on special occasions before. Sarah selected ingredients for meals she'd only dreamed of making, foods that required more than basic survival cooking. As they checked out, the total that would have stressed her beyond measure just a month ago felt manageable, reasonable, normal. The transformation in their daily life was remarkable. Emma could join the after-school art program she'd been wanting to try. Sarah could buy the books Emma loved instead of relying solely on library copies. They could eat at restaurants occasionally, not just fast food, but actual restaurants where servers brought real plates and the experience was pleasant rather than purely functional. But the most significant change was in Sarah's sense of security and possibility. For the first time since Emma's father had left, Sarah wasn't constantly calculating expenses, wasn't lying awake at night worrying about how to pay the next bill, wasn't making decisions based purely on crass financial limitations. Margaret called regularly to check on Sarah's progress, and their conversations gradually evolved from mentor-mentee discussions to genuine friendship. Margaret shared stories about building the hotel business with her late husband, about the challenges and rewards of hospitality work, about balancing professional ambitions with personal fulfillment. "You know," Margaret said during one of their weekly coffee meetings, "Harold would have loved watching you work. He always said the hotel business was really about understanding human nature, about recognizing what people need even before they know they need it. I feel like I'm finally doing work that matters," Sarah admitted. "At the diner, I was just serving food and taking orders. Here, I'm helping create experiences that people will remember for years. That's the difference between a job and a calling," Margaret smiled. "You've found your calling, dear. The question now is how far you want to take it." The question proved prophetic. 6 months into her role as hospitality director, Sarah had transformed not just her own life, but the hotel's operations in ways that impressed even David. Guest satisfaction scores had increased significantly. Repeat bookings were up 20%, and the hotel was receiving recognition from travel publications that had never noticed them before. "I've been thinking," David said during one of their weekly planning meetings. "We're getting inquiries about expanding our event services, maybe offering wedding planning beyond just venue rental. It would require someone with exceptional organizational skills and a real understanding of what IS makes events special." Sarah looked up from the guest feedback reports she'd been reviewing. "That sounds like an amazing opportunity for the hotel." "I was hoping you'd say that, because I can't think of anyone better suited to develop that division than you. It would mean a promotion." "Of course. Senior Director of Hospitality and Events, with a salary adjustment to match the increased responsibilities." The promotion came with a salary increase to $85,000 annually, putting Sarah firmly in the middle class for the first time in her life. More importantly, it gave her the opportunity to build something new, to create a service that would make the Grand Harbor a destination for life's most important celebrations. Emma, now 8 years old and thriving in her new circumstances, watched her mother's transformation with the wise eyes of a child who had seen both struggle and success. "Mommy," she said one evening as Sarah was working on plans for the new events division, "do you ever think about the lady who lost her ring?" Sarah looked up from her laptop, smiling at her daughter's ability to identify the heart of things. "I think about Margaret often. Why you ask? Because if she hadn't lost her ring, and if you hadn't found it, and if you hadn't given it back, none of this would have happened, right?" "That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest changes." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "It's like that story you read me about the butterfly whose wings caused a hurricane on the other side of the world. Except this time, being honest, caused a good hurricane." Sarah laughed at her daughter's unique interpretation of chaos theory, but there was truth in it. One small act of integrity had created ripples that transformed their entire lives, opening doors that had seemed permanently closed and creating opportunities that exceeded Sarah's wildest imaginings. The first wedding Sarah planned under the hotel's expanded services was for a young couple who had saved for 3 years to afford their dream celebration. Working with them reminded Sarah of why she loved hospitality work, the joy of turning someone's vision into reality, of creating moments that would be treasured forever. The ceremony took place in the hotel's garden at sunset, with flowers that complemented rather than competed with the natural beauty of the setting. The reception flowed seamlessly from cocktails in the conservatory to dinner in the rose room, with every detail coordinated to create an experience that felt effortless for the guests, but had required weeks of careful planning behind the scenes. When the bride hugged Sarah at the end of the evening, tears streaming down her face as she thanked her for making everything perfect, Sarah felt the same satisfaction she'd experienced when returning Margaret's ring. It was the joy of knowing she'd made a positive difference in someone's life, the fulfillment that came from using her talents to serve others. 1 year after finding the ring in her tip jar, Sarah stood in her new office overlooking the hotel's gardens, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed continued growth in both revenue and guest satisfaction. The events division she'd built was booked solid through the following year, and inquiries were coming in from couples who were willing to travel considerable distances to have their celebrations at the Grand Harbor. Margaret knocked on the open door, carrying 2 cups of tea, and wearing the smile that had become familiar and dear to Sarah over the months of their friendship. "Busy day?" she asked, settling into one of the comfortable chairs Sarah had chosen for guest consultations. "The best kind of busy," Sarah replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "We just booked 3 more weddings for next spring, and I'm working on a proposal for a corporate retreat that could become a regular annual event. Harold always said success in hospitality isn't measured just in revenue, but in the stories your guests take home with them," Margaret observed. "From what I hear, the Grand Harbor is creating some beautiful stories these days." Sarah moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where another wedding would take place that weekend. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. A year ago, I was worried about making rent. Now I'm building something that matters, providing Emma with opportunities I never thought possible." "You were always capable of this, Sarah. Finding my ring didn't create your abilities. It simply revealed your character to people who could recognize its value." Margaret joined Sarah at the window, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence, watching the gardeners prepare the space for the upcoming ceremony. "I have something for you," Margaret said eventually, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small wrapped package. "Consider it a 1-year anniversary gift." Sarah opened the package to find a delicate silver locket, antique but beautifully maintained. Inside was a tiny photograph of Emma on one side, and on the other, an engraved inscription, "Character is destiny." "It belonged to my grandmother," Margaret explained. "She always said that who we choose to be determines where we end up in life. I can't think of anyone who exemplifies that philosophy more than you do." Sarah felt tears threatening as she fastened the locket around her neck. It was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of the journey she'd taken, the choices she'd made, and the future she was building through integrity and hard work. That evening, Sarah sat with Emma at their kitchen table, helping with homework that was more challenging than anything they'd tackled at their old apartment. Emma was thriving academically, socially, and emotionally in ways that Sarah attributed partly to their improved circumstances, but mostly to the confidence that came from watching her mother pursue and achieve her dreams. "Mommy," Emma said, looking up from her math worksheet, "my teacher asked us to write about someone we admire for homework tomorrow. Can I write about you?" Sarah's heart swelled with pride and love. "You can write about anyone you want, sweetheart. What would you say about me?" Emma thought for a moment, her face serious with concentration. "I would say that you're the kind of person who does the right thing even when it's hard, and that you taught me that being honest and kind can lead to amazing things, and that you never gave up on making a better life for us, even when things were scary." Sarah pulled Emma into a hug, marveling at the wisdom her 8-year-old daughter possessed. "You know what, Em? I'd be honored to be the subject of your essay." As Sarah tucked Emma into bed that night, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The struggling single mother who had found a ring in her tip jar seemed like a different person now. Though Sarah knew she was still fundamentally the same woman who had chosen integrity over easy money, who had spent days searching for a stranger to return something precious. The difference wasn't in who she was, but in the opportunities that had opened up when the right people recognized her character. Margaret had seen past the uniform and financial struggles to the person underneath. David had trusted his mother's judgment and been willing to take a chance on someone whose resume didn't match the traditional requirements for the position. But most importantly, Sarah had been willing to take chances on herself, to believe that she deserved better and was capable of achieving it. The ring had been a catalyst, but the transformation had come from Sarah's willingness to step outside her comfort zone and embrace possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine. 2 years after that life-changing morning at Murphy's Diner, Sarah received a phone call that would open yet another door to her expanding future. The caller was the regional manager for a luxury hotel chain, someone who had heard about the Grand Harbor's success and Sarah's role in creating it. "We're looking for someone to oversee hospitality operations for our boutique properties throughout the region," the woman explained. "It would involve traveling to different locations, developing service standards, training staff, and essentially replicating what you've accomplished at the Grand Harbor on a larger scale. The position would mean another significant salary increase and the opportunity to impact guest experiences at multiple properties. It would also mean occasional travel, though nothing that would disrupt Emma's school or their life together." Sarah listened to the offer with the same careful attention she brought to all important decisions, weighing the opportunities against the potential challenges, considering not just the immediate benefits but the long-term implications for her career and her family. "I'm flattered by the offer," she said finally, "but I'd need to discuss it with my current employer and make sure any transition would be handled in a way that's fair to everyone involved." The conversation with David was easier than Sarah had expected. Rather than trying to counteroffer or convince her to stay, he listened thoughtfully and then surprised her with his response. "I've been expecting this call for months," he admitted. "What you've built here has attracted attention throughout the industry. While I hate to lose you, I'd be selfish to hold you back from an opportunity that's clearly the next step in your career." They worked together over the following weeks to create a transition plan that would preserve everything Sarah had built at the Grand Harbor, while allowing her to move forward with confidence. Patricia would take over many of Sarah's daily responsibilities, with Linda stepping up to manage the events division that had become such a crucial part of the hotel's success. On Sarah's last day at the Grand Harbor, the staff threw a farewell party in the conservatory where she'd had her first interview with David. Margaret was there, of course, along with Emma and even Gus from Murphy's Diner, looking uncomfortable but proud in his only good shirt. "I want to thank all of you," Sarah said, addressing the group that had become her professional family. "When I started here, I thought I was just taking a job. Instead, I found a calling, a community, and the confidence to believe in possibilities I'd never imagined. She looked around the room at faces that had become dear to her, people who had supported her growth and celebrated her successes. The Grand Harbor will always be the place where I learned that work can be more than just earning a paycheck. It can be about creating something beautiful and meaningful that touches other people's lives. Margaret approached as the party was winding down, carrying a small gift bag with her characteristic warm smile. "Another going-away present?" Sarah asked, touched by the gesture. "Not exactly," Margaret replied. "This is something I want you to have as you start this new chapter." Inside the bag was Margaret's original wedding ring, the one that had started this entire journey. Sarah stared at it in shock, unable to understand why Margaret would give away something so precious. "I can't accept this," Sarah said immediately. "This is your connection to your husband, your most treasured possession." Margaret took Sarah's hands, pressing the ring into her palm. "Dear, this ring brought you into my life, and through you, it brought purpose back to mine. Watching you build your career, seeing you create opportunities for yourself and Emma, being part of your journey. That's given me more joy than I've felt since Harold died." She closed Sarah's fingers around the ring. "I want you to keep this as a reminder that sometimes the most important things in life come to us when we least expect them, through people we never imagined we'd meet. And I want you to remember that character really is destiny, but the choices we make when no one is watching determine the life we get to live." Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she understood the profound gift Margaret was offering. Not just the ring itself, but the friendship and mentorship that had transformed her life. "Besides," Margaret added with a mischievous smile, "I have a feeling this ring hasn't finished creating miracles yet." 3 years later, Sarah stood in the ballroom of a luxury resort in Colorado, overseeing the final preparations for a wedding that would be featured in a national bridal magazine. As the regional director of hospitality, she'd had the opportunity to work with venues across the country, each presenting unique challenges and opportunities to create unforgettable experiences. The work was demanding but fulfilling in ways Sarah could never have imagined during her days at Murphy's Diner. She was building a reputation as someone who could transform properties, who understood that luxury wasn't about expensive finishes, but about anticipating and exceeding guest expectations in ways that created emotional connections. Emma, now 11 and growing into a confident, compassionate young woman, had adapted well to their improved circumstances and occasional travel. She'd been to more states than most adults, had met people from around the world, and had developed an appreciation for different cultures and perspectives that would serve her well throughout her life. "Mom," Emma said, finding Sarah in the ballroom where she was making final adjustments to the centerpieces, "there's someone here to see you." Sarah looked up to see Margaret walking across the ballroom, elegant as always despite being in her late 70s now. Behind her was a young woman Sarah didn't recognize, probably in her mid-20s, with the nervous energy of someone facing an important moment. "Margaret, what are you doing in Colorado?" "Well," Margaret smiled, "I wanted you to meet someone. Sarah, this is my granddaughter Rebecca. She just graduated from hospitality management school, and she's been following your career with great interest." Rebecca stepped forward, her handshake firm despite her obvious nervousness. "Ms. Mitchell, I know this is probably not the best time, but I was hoping I could talk to you about possibly working with your team. I know it's a long shot, but your reputation in the industry is incredible. And I'd be honored to learn from someone who's accomplished what you have." Sarah studied the young woman, seeing something familiar in her eagerness and determination. "Tell me about yourself, Rebecca. What draws you to hospitality work?" "I love the idea of creating perfect moments for people," Rebecca said, her nervousness giving way to genuine enthusiasm. "When I was little, my grandmother would tell me stories about the hotel business, about how the right person in the right place at the right time could make someone's special day absolutely magical. I want to be that person for people." Sarah smiled, hearing echoes of her own passion in Rebecca's words. The industry needed people who understood that hospitality was about more than efficient service. It was about recognizing the humanity in every guest and responding to it with genuine care. "I might have an opening for an events coordinator at our property in Napa Valley," Sarah said thoughtfully. "It's challenging work, long hours, and you'd be starting at the bottom despite your education. But if you're serious about learning the business, it could be a good opportunity." Rebecca's face lit up with the same joy Sarah remembered feeling when David had offered her the position at the Grand Harbor. "I'm absolutely serious. I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself." As Sarah shook hands with Rebecca to welcome her to the team, she felt Margaret's ring, which she now wore on a chain around her neck, warm against her skin. The ring had indeed created another miracle, bringing together 3 generations of women who understood the power of integrity, hard work, and genuine care for others. That evening, after the wedding reception had ended flawlessly and the last guests had retired to their rooms, Sarah sat with Margaret on the resort's terrace, looking out at the mountain landscape under a canopy of stars. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd made a different choice that day?" Sarah asked. "If I'd kept the ring instead of searching for you?" Margaret considered the question seriously. "I think you would have regretted it for the rest of your life. Not because of the missed opportunity, though that would have been significant, but because it wouldn't have been true to who you are. You couldn't have lived with yourself knowing you'd chosen the easy path over the right path." Sarah nodded, understanding the truth in Margaret's words. "Sometimes I think about parallel universes, about the version of me that might have kept that ring and used the money to pay rent and buy Emma new shoes. And what do you think happened to that version of you?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question. "I think she would have solved her immediate problems but never addressed the underlying issues. She would have stayed stuck in the same patterns, the same limitations, the same small dreams. The money would have run out eventually, and she would have been right back where she started, except with the added burden of knowing she'd compromised her integrity for temporary relief." "Exactly," Margaret said softly. "Character really is destiny, Sarah. The woman who could keep that ring was never going to be the woman who could build the life you've created." As Sarah prepared to return to her room, Margaret pulled her into a warm embrace. "You know," Margaret said, "Harold used to say that we never really know the impact our choices will have on the world. He said every act of kindness, every moment of integrity, every decision to do right, even when it's difficult, creates ripples that spread far beyond what we can see." Sarah thought about those ripples as she made her way through the quiet resort corridors. The ring she'd returned had led to her career transformation, which had led to better opportunities for Emma, which had led to her current position helping other hospitality professionals develop their skills, which had now led to giving Rebecca a chance to begin her own journey in the industry. 6 months later, Sarah received a call that would represent the culmination of everything she'd built since that morning at Murphy's Diner. The caller was the CEO of a major hospitality consulting firm, offering her a position as senior vice president with responsibility for luxury property development and staff training across the country. "We've been watching your work for several years," the CEO explained. "Your approach to hospitality, your ability to transform properties and develop talent, your reputation for integrity and innovation, these are exactly the qualities we need to lead our expansion into new markets." The salary offered was more than Sarah had ever imagined earning, but more importantly, the position would allow her to influence hospitality standards across dozens of properties. Touching the experiences of thousands of guests and providing career development opportunities for hundreds of hospitality professionals, Emma, now 12 and wise beyond her years, listened to Sarah explain the opportunity over dinner at their favorite restaurant. "It sounds amazing, Mom," Emma said thoughtfully. But it also sounds like it would mean a lot more travel, maybe us moving again. Sarah reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. This job would be incredible for my career, but your happiness and stability are more important to me than any professional opportunity. We've moved enough in your life. If you want to stay where we are, if you want to keep your friends and your school, I'll turn down the offer. Emma smiled, and Sarah saw in her daughter's face the same strength and wisdom that had carried them through their most difficult times. Mom, do you remember what you told me about chances being opportunities wearing scary masks? Sarah nodded, amazed at her daughter's memory and insight. Well, I think this is one of those chances. And I think we've learned that we can handle scary things together, especially when they lead to good things. The decision to accept the position proved to be another transformative moment in Sarah's journey. The new role challenged her in ways she'd never experienced, requiring her to develop systems and standards that could be implemented across diverse properties, to train managers who would then train their own staff, to solve complex operational problems that affected multiple locations simultaneously. But it also gave her the platform to influence the hospitality industry in meaningful ways, to advocate for Kate, employee development programs, guest experience innovations, and operational practices that prioritized both business success and human dignity. 2 years into her role as Senior Vice President, Sarah was invited to speak at the DAO, International Hospitality Management Conference, addressing an audience of industry leaders from around the world. Her topic was Integrity as a Business Strategy: How Character Drives Success in Hospitality. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of professionals who had gathered to learn and share best practices, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a struggling single mother counting tips in a diner to a recognized leader in the hospitality industry, the path had been marked by choices, opportunities, and the support of people who had believed in her potential. I want to tell you about a ring, Sarah began, and proceeded to share the story of that transformative morning at Murphy's Diner, the decision to return something valuable to its rightful owner, and the cascade of opportunities that had followed. I'm not suggesting that every act of integrity will lead to immediate rewards, she continued, but I am suggesting that integrity creates the foundation for everything else we want to build in our lives and careers. When we choose to do right, even when it's difficult, even when no one is watching, even when there's a cost involved, we create the conditions for opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise. After her presentation, Sarah was approached by a young man who reminded her of herself years earlier, someone clearly passionate about hospitality but uncertain about his path forward. Ms. S. Mitchell, he said. I'm currently working front desk at a small hotel, and I'm trying to figure out how to advance my career. Do you have any advice for someone just starting out? Sarah smiled, thinking about all the people who had offered her guidance and support along her journey. Focus on being excellent at whatever you're doing right now, even if it seems small or unimportant. Look for ways to solve problems, to make guests happier, to support your colleagues. And remember that every interaction is an opportunity to demonstrate your character and your commitment to service. She paused, remembering Margaret's words about character being destiny. Most importantly, never compromise your integrity for short-term gain. The right opportunities will come when you're ready for them, and you'll only be ready if you've built a foundation of trustworthiness and excellence. That evening, Sarah called Margaret to share how the conference had gone. At 81, Margaret remained sharp and engaged, still taking an active interest in Sarah's career and Emma's development. I'm so proud of you, dear, Margaret said after hearing about the presentation. You've become exactly what Harold and I always hoped someone would become through our business. a leader who understands that hospitality is really about serving humanity. "I've been thinking about writing a book," Sarah admitted, "about the connection between character and success, about how the choices we make when we think no one is looking end up shaping our entire lives." "That's a wonderful idea," Margaret encouraged. "Your story could inspire others to make choices based on their values rather than their fears or immediate needs." The book, titled The Ring of Truth: How One Choice Changed Everything, was published 18 months later to critical acclaim and commercial success. It became required reading in several purpose hospitality management programs and was translated into multiple languages for international audiences. But beyond its professional impact, the book became a source of inspiration for people in all walks of life who were facing difficult choices, who needed reminding that integrity and character were not old-fashioned concepts, but timeless principles that created the foundation for meaningful success. Emma, now 15 and preparing for high school, read the book with pride and amazement at seeing her mother's journey documented in such detail. "Mom," she said after finishing the final chapter, "I know this sounds weird, but I'm grateful for all the hard times we went through when I was little." Sarah looked up from her laptop where she was working on her second book, surprised by her daughter's comment. "Why's that, sweetheart?" "Because they made you who you are." If things had been easy, if you'd never had to make tough choices or struggle to take care of us, you might not have developed the strength and character that led to everything good that happened afterward. Sarah felt tears welling up as she recognized the profound wisdom in her daughter's observation. "You know, you might be right about that. Besides," Emma continued with a grin, "if you hadn't been working at that diner, you never would have found the ring, and we might still be eating mac and cheese 3 times a week." They both laughed, but Sarah recognized the deeper truth in Emma's words. Every difficulty they'd faced, every challenge they'd overcome, had been a necessary part of the journey that led them to where they were now. 5 years after her presentation at the international conference, Sarah received a phone call that represented the culmination of her career transformation. The caller was the board chairman of a prestigious resort company, offering her the position of Chief Executive Officer. "We need someone who understands hospitality from the ground up," the chairman explained. "Someone who's worked every level of the industry, who has a proven track record of developing both properties and people, and who has the integrity to lead a company through complex challenges while maintaining our commitment to excellence." The CEO position would make Sarah one of the most powerful women in the hospitality industry. With responsibility for properties around the world and thousands of employees, it would also mean a salary and benefits package that would place her firmly among the top earners in her field. But as she considered the offer, Sarah found herself thinking not about the money or the prestige, but about the opportunity to influence the industry at the highest level, to implement policies and practices that would improve the working conditions and career prospects for hospitality professionals everywhere. Emma, now 18 and preparing for college, listened to Sarah explain the opportunity with the maturity and insight she'd developed through years of watching her mother navigate complex decisions. "It sounds like the perfect job for you, Mom," Emma said. "You spent years learning how to make individual properties better, training people to excel in hospitality, and building systems that work across, say, multiple locations. Now you get to do all of that on the biggest scale possible." Sarah smiled at her daughter's analysis, amazed at how perceptive Emma had become. "You're not worried about me taking on something this demanding? Mom, you've been preparing for this job your entire career, even when you didn't know it. Every challenge you've faced, every problem you've solved, every person you've mentored, it's all been leading to this moment." The acceptance of the CEO position marked the beginning of Sarah's most impactful years in the hospitality industry. Under her leadership, the resort company not only achieved record financial performance but also became known for its innovative employee development programs. its commitment to sustainable tourism practices, and its industry-leading guest satisfaction scores. Sarah implemented policies that provided educational opportunities for frontline staff, created clear pathways for career advancement, and established mentorship programs that connected experienced managers with emerging talent. She knew firsthand the difference that opportunity and support could make in someone's life, and she was determined to create those conditions for others. 3 years into her tenure as CEO, Sarah received a letter that reminded her of the personal impact her journey had created. The letter was from Rebecca, Margaret's granddaughter, who had worked her way up from events coordinator to general manager of the Napa Valley property. Dear Sarah, the letter began, I wanted you to know that I've just accepted a position as regional director for a boutique hotel group in Europe. It's a dream job, and I couldn't have gotten here without the foundation you helped me build those years ago in Colorado. The letter continued, but more than the professional opportunities you gave me, I want to thank you for showing me what leadership with integrity looks like. You demonstrated that success in this industry isn't just about financial performance. It's about creating experiences that matter and developing people who will carry those values forward. Rebecca concluded by mentioning that she was implementing many of Sarah's training methodologies in her new role, ensuring that the principles of character-driven hospitality would continue to spread throughout the industry. Margaret, now 85 and still one of Sarah's closest confidants, read the letter with tears in her eyes during one of their regular video calls. Do you see what you've created? Margaret asked. It's not just your own success story anymore. It's a legacy that's touching lives and careers all over the world. Sarah felt the weight of that legacy as she prepared for the 10th anniversary celebration of the day she'd found Margaret's ring. The company was hosting a gala dinner to honor Sarah's decade of leadership, but she had insisted that the real focus should be on celebrating the achievements of the employees and managers who had made the company's success possible. The guest list included people from every stage of Sarah's journey, from Gus at Murphy's Diner to international hospitality leaders she'd worked with in her CEO role. Emma, now a senior in college studying international business with a focus on sustainable tourism, would be the evening's keynote speaker. As Sarah prepared for the gala, she stood in her office looking out at the city skyline, wearing Margaret's ring on a chain around her neck as she always did for important occasions. The ring had become her talisman, a reminder of the moment when everything changed and the principles that had guided her ever since. Emma's keynote speech that evening was a masterpiece of storytelling and inspiration. She spoke about growing up watching her mother transform not just her own life, but the lives of countless others through integrity, hard work, and genuine care for people. My mother taught me that success isn't measured only by what you achieve for yourself, Emma said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom filled with industry leaders, but by what you make possible for others. She showed me that the choices we make when we think no one is watching become the foundation for everything we build afterward. Emma paused, looking directly at Sarah in the audience. 10 years ago, my mother found something valuable that didn't belong to her. She could have kept it and solved our immediate problems. Instead, she chose to find its rightful owner, and that choice led to opportunities that changed not just our lives, but the lives of hundreds of people who have worked with and learned from her since then. The standing ovation that followed lasted several minutes, but Sarah barely noticed the applause. She was thinking about the ripple effects of that single decision, the careers that had been launched, the guest experiences that had been enhanced, the industry practices that had been improved because of choices made by people who understood that character really was destiny. After the gala, Sarah found herself in conversation with a young woman who had traveled from across the country to attend the celebration. The woman introduced herself as Jennifer, a recent hospitality school graduate who was struggling to find her place in the industry. Ms. Mitchell, Jennifer said, I know this might not be the best time, but I wanted to tell you that your book changed my life. I was about to give up on hospitality and go into finance because it seemed more stable, more predictable. But reading about your journey made me realize that I was choosing safety over passion. Sarah smiled, recognizing the familiar struggle between security and possibility that had defined her own early career decisions. What changed your mind? Sarah asked. You wrote about how the ring chose you as much as you chose to return it. Jennifer replied. That made me think about how opportunities come to us disguised as challenges, and how we only recognize them if we're living according to our values rather than our fears. Jennifer paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. I was wondering if your company has any entry-level positions available. I know I don't have much experience, but I'm willing to start anywhere and work my way up. Farah felt a familiar warmth as she recognized the eagerness and determination in Jennifer's voice. As a matter of fact, we do have an opening for a guest services coordinator at our property in Charleston. It's demanding work, and you'd be starting at the bottom, despite your education. But if you're serious about learning the business from the ground up, it could be exactly the opportunity you need. The joy on Jennifer's face reminded Sarah of her own reaction when David had offered her the position at the Grand Harbor all those years ago. The cycle was continuing, creating new opportunities for people who were ready to embrace them. Margaret's health began to decline in the months following the gala, and Sarah found herself making frequent trips to spend time with the woman who had become like a mother to her. During one of their visits, Margaret shared something she'd never mentioned before. Sarah, I want you to know that Harold and I never had children of our own, she said, her voice weaker than usual but still filled with warmth. We poured all our parental energy into the hotel business and the people who worked with us. But meeting you, watching you grow and succeed, being part of Emma's life, it's given me the experience of having a daughter and granddaughter that I never thought I'd have. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she understood the full depth of their relationship. Margaret, you've been the most important mentor and friend of my life. You saw potential in me when I couldn't see it myself, and you gave me opportunities that changed everything. We gave each other gifts, Margaret replied. You returned my ring and gave me back my faith in humanity. I helped you find a career path that matched your talents. But the real gift was the relationship itself, the family we created together. Margaret passed away peacefully 6 months later, surrounded by Sarah, Emma, David, and Rebecca. Her final words were about the importance of character and the power of choices made with integrity. She left her estate to Sarah and Emma, but more importantly, she left them with the knowledge that love and family could be created through mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for one another. The memorial service was held at the Grand Harbor Hotel, in the conservatory where Sarah had first interviewed for the position that launched her career transformation. Hundreds of people attended, including many whose lives had been touched by Margaret's kindness and wisdom over the years. Sarah spoke at the service about Margaret's legacy, about how one woman's recognition of character in others had created ripple effects that would continue for generations. She talked about the ring that had brought them together, about the friendship that had sustained them both, and about the lessons that would guide their family forever. Margaret used to say that character is destiny, Sarah concluded. She proved that by recognizing character in others and helping them fulfill their destiny. Her legacy lives on in every person she encouraged, every opportunity she created, and every act of integrity she inspired. After the service, David approached Sarah with a proposal that honored both Margaret's memory and Sarah's journey. I'd like to establish the Margaret Whitmore Character and Hospitality Scholarship, he said. It would provide educational opportunities for young people from challenging backgrounds who demonstrate exceptional integrity and potential in hospitality work. Would you consider serving as the selection committee chair? Sarah accepted immediately, knowing that Margaret would have loved the idea of helping young people overcome obstacles through education and opportunity. The scholarship program became one of Sarah's most fulfilling responsibilities, allowing her to identify and support emerging talent while ensuring that Margaret's values continued to influence the industry. 5 years after Margaret's passing, Sarah stood before another international conference audience, this time delivering the keynote address at the Global Hospitality Leadership Summit. Her topic was Legacy Leadership, Building Success that Transcends Individual Achievement. True leadership in our industry isn't about climbing the corporate ladder, Sarah told the audience. It's about building ladders for others to climb. It's about creating opportunities, developing talent, and ensuring that the principles of character and integrity are passed down to the next generation of hospitality professionals. She talked about the scholarship recipients who are now working in hotels around the world, carrying forward the values of excellence and integrity that had been instilled in them through their educational experiences. She spoke about the management development programs her company had created, the mentorship networks that connected experienced leaders with emerging talent, and the industry standards that prioritized both business success and human dignity. The most important measure of our success as leaders, Sarah concluded, is not what we achieve for ourselves, but what we make possible for others. Every choice we make, every opportunity we create, every person we develop becomes part of a legacy that extends far beyond our individual careers. The conference generated significant media attention, with several publications featuring Sarah's story as an example of how personal integrity could lead to industry transformation. But the response that meant the most came from Emma, who had watched the keynote address online from her graduate school dorm room. "Mom," Emma said during their video call that evening, "watching you speak today made me realize something. You didn't just change your own life when you returned that ring. You changed the entire trajectory of what was possible for our family, for your colleagues, for the industry itself. That's not just a success story, that's a legacy story." Emma's words stayed with Sarah as she reflected on the 15 years that had passed since that transformative morning at Murphy's Diner. The struggling single mother who had found a ring in her tip jar could never have imagined the life she would eventually build, the impact she would have, or the family she would create along the way. But the core values that had guided that initial decision, the commitment to integrity even when it was difficult, the belief that doing right by others would ultimately lead to positive outcomes, those principles had remained constant throughout every challenge and opportunity that followed. As Sarah prepared for the next phase of her career, which would involve transitioning from active CEO responsibilities to a chairman role that would allow her to focus on mentorship and industry development, she thought about the message she wanted to leave for future generations of hospitality professionals. The answer came to her as she looked at Margaret's ring, which she now wore on her right hand as a daily reminder of the journey that had brought her to this point. The message was simple but profound. Character really is destiny. Choices made with integrity create opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise, and success that serves others is the only kind of success that truly matters. Emma, now completing her graduate degree and preparing to begin her own career in sustainable tourism development, had decided to start her professional journey in an entry-level position at a nonprofit organization focused on community-based tourism in developing countries. "I want to understand the industry from the ground up," Emma explained to Sarah. "I want to earn my opportunities through hard work and integrity, just like you did." Sarah felt immense pride as she recognized that the values she'd tried to instill in Emma had taken root and would guide her daughter's choices throughout her career. The cycle of character-driven success would continue into the next generation. On the 20th anniversary of finding Margaret's ring, Sarah established the Character and Hospitality Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing educational opportunities, mentorship programs, and career development resources for hospitality professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. The Foundation's mission statement, which Sarah wrote herself, reflected everything she'd learned about the connection between personal integrity and professional success. We believe that character is the foundation of excellence in hospitality, that every person deserves the opportunity to develop their potential, and that success achieved through integrity creates positive change that extends far beyond individual achievement. The Foundation's first major initiative was the creation of a network of hospitality schools that would provide full scholarships to students who demonstrated exceptional character along with academic potential. The curriculum would emphasize not just technical skills but also the values and principles that create lasting success in service industries. Jennifer, the young woman who had approached Sarah at the gala years earlier, was now a successful hotel general manager and agreed to serve on the Foundation's board of directors. Her own career trajectory had followed the pattern Sarah knew well. Opportunities created through character, success built on integrity, and leadership focused on developing others. "You know," Jennifer said during one of their board meetings, "I think about that ring often, not just as the catalyst for your success, but as a symbol of what happens when we choose principles over convenience. That choice created a chain reaction that's still generating positive outcomes decades later." Sarah nodded, understanding the truth in Jennifer's observation. The ring had indeed been more than a test of character. It had been the beginning of a legacy that would continue to influence the hospitality industry for generations to come. As Sarah prepared for her final keynote address as CEO, she reflected on the journey that had taken her from a struggling single mother to one of the most respected leaders in her industry. The speech would be delivered at the hotel management program where she had been appointed as a distinguished visiting professor, sharing her expertise with the next generation of hospitality professionals. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of young faces filled with ambition and hope, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility that came with her platform. These students would become the leaders who would shape the future of hospitality, and the values they learn now would influence their entire careers. "I want to tell you about a choice," Sarah began, launching into the story that had become central to her teaching and mentoring. It was a simple choice, really. Return something valuable to its rightful owner, or keep it and solve immediate financial problems. But that choice became the foundation for everything that followed in my career. She talked about the principles that had guided her journey. The importance of integrity in building trust, the power of character in creating opportunities, the responsibility of success to serve others, and the understanding that true leadership meant developing the potential in everyone around you. "Your education will give you knowledge and skills," Sarah told the students. "But your character will determine what you do with those capabilities. The choices you make when you think no one is watching. When there's no immediate reward for doing right, when it would be easier to compromise your values, those choices will shape not just your career but your entire life." After the presentation, a student approached Sarah with a question that reminded her of her own early uncertainty about career paths and possibilities. "Professor Mitchell," the student said, "how do you know when you're making the right choice? How do you have confidence that integrity will really lead to success when there are so many examples of people who seem to succeed through other means?" Sarah smiled, remembering asking similar questions during her own journey. "The truth is, you can't always know in the moment whether you're making the right choice, but you can know whether you're making a choice that aligns with your values and the person you want to become. Success that comes through integrity might take longer to achieve, but it's sustainable in ways that other kinds of success are not." She paused, thinking about all the people whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of her decision to return Margaret's ring. "And here's something I've learned over the years," Sarah continued. "When you build success on a foundation of character, it creates opportunities for others too. Your integrity doesn't just benefit you, it creates positive change that extends to everyone whose life intersects with yours." The student nodded thoughtfully, and Sarah recognized the same hunger for purpose and meaning that had driven her own career choices. She knew that this young person, and others like them, would carry forward the values and principles that would continue to elevate the hospitality industry. As Sarah's formal career began to wind down and her focus shifted increasingly to teaching, mentoring, and foundation work, she found herself thinking often about the concept of legacy. What would remain of her influence after she was no longer actively leading companies or speaking at conferences? The answer came to her gradually, through the stories shared by former colleagues, mentees, and scholarship recipients. Her legacy wasn't just in the companies she'd transformed or the standards she'd established. It was in the people whose careers she'd influenced and the principles they would carry forward throughout their own professional journeys. Emma, now working as a sustainable tourism consultant and traveling the world to help communities develop responsible tourism initiatives, called Sarah regularly to share stories from her work. During one of their conversations, Emma mentioned something that perfectly captured the generational impact of character-driven leadership. "Mom, I was working with a village in Costa Rica last week, helping them develop ecotourism offerings. One of the community leaders said something that reminded me of your story about the ring. He said that when you make decisions based on what's right for the community, rather than what's convenient for yourself, opportunities appear that you never could have imagined." Emma continued, "It made me realize that the principles you've taught me aren't just about business success. They're about how to live a meaningful life that contributes to something larger than yourself." Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she recognized that the values she tried to instill in Emma had taken root and were now influencing her daughter's approach to creating positive change in the world. The legacy was continuing, expanding beyond the hospitality industry to touch communities and individuals around the globe. On the 25th anniversary of finding Margaret's ring, Sarah published her final book, titled The Ripple Effect: How One Choice Creates Infinite Possibilities. The book wove together her personal story with the stories of dozens of people whose lives had been influenced by her career journey, creating a tapestry that illustrated the far-reaching impact of character-driven leadership. The book's dedication read, "To Margaret Whitmore, who saw character where others saw only circumstances, and to Emma, who carries these values forward into a future full of possibilities." The book became an instant bestseller, but more importantly, it sparked conversations in universities, corporations, and community organizations about the connection between personal integrity, societal impact. Sarah found herself invited to speak not just at hospitality conferences, but at leadership forums across multiple industries. During her final keynote address as an active professional, delivered at the same international conference where she'd first shared her story decades earlier, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to that moment. 25 years ago, I made a choice that seemed simple at the time," she told the audience. "I returned something valuable to its rightful owner because it was the right thing to do. I had no idea that choice would lead to a career transformation, industry recognition, or the opportunity to influence thousands of wives." She paused, looking out at faces that represented the future of hospitality leadership. "But here's what I've learned. It wasn't really about the ring at all. It was about the willingness to choose principles over convenience, to believe that integrity creates opportunities, and to understand that true success serves others. Those principles are available to every one of us in every choice we make, every single day." Sarah concluded her address with a challenge that had become central to her teaching. "I urge you to look for your own ring moment, that choice that will define your character and determine your destiny. It might not come in the form of lost jewelry. It might be a small act of kindness, a decision to speak truth when it's difficult, or a choice to help someone else succeed, even when there's no immediate benefit to you. Whatever form it takes, recognize it for what it is: an opportunity to choose the person you want to become and the legacy you want to create. Character really is destiny, but only if we have the courage to choose character when it matters most. The standing ovation that followed seemed to last forever, but Sarah barely noticed. She was thinking about Margaret, about the ring that had started everything, about Emma's bright future, and about all the young professionals who would make their own character-defining choices in the years to come. As Sarah prepared to transition fully into her role as Professor Emeritus and Foundation Chair, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this point. The struggling single mother who had counted tips at Murphy's Diner could never have imagined the life she would eventually build. But every choice along the way had been guided by the same principle that had led her to return a lost ring to its rightful owner. The ring itself, which Sarah still wore daily, had become more than a piece of jewelry or even a symbol of her transformation. It had become a reminder that character really is destiny, that integrity creates opportunities, and that the choices we make when we think no one is watching become the foundation for everything we build afterward. Emma's wedding, which took place in the Grand Harbor Hotel's garden exactly 30 years after Sarah had first interviewed with David, brought together people from every phase of Sarah's journey. Gus from Murphy's Diner, now retired but still gruff and kind, sat next to international hospitality leaders. Former colleagues, scholarship recipients, and mentees filled the garden with laughter and love. As Sarah watched her daughter exchange vows with a young man who shared Emma's commitment to sustainable development and social responsibility, she felt the completion of a circle that had begun with a simple choice to do the CAM. Right thing. During the reception, held in the same conservatory where Sarah had first met with David decades earlier, Emma stood to give a toast that brought tears to every eye in the room. "My mother taught me that success isn't about what you achieve for yourself," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "It's about what you make possible for others. She showed me that character is the foundation of everything meaningful in life, and that the choices we make when no one is watching determine the kind of person we become." Emma raised her glass, looking directly at Sarah. "Mom, you've created a legacy that will continue to influence lives long after any of us are gone. Thank you for showing me that integrity isn't just about doing the right thing, it's about creating a life worth living." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Sarah found herself alone in the conservatory, surrounded by memories of the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about Margaret, whose wisdom and support had made everything possible. She thought about David, who had taken a chance on a waitress with no formal qualifications but abundant character. She thought about all the colleagues, mentees, and students whose lives had intersected with hers along the way. Most of all, she thought about the ring that had started it all, the simple piece of jewelry that had tested her character and, in doing so, had revealed the path to a life of meaning and impact. The ring had taught her that destiny isn't determined by circumstances but by choices, that integrity creates opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise, and that success built on character creates positive change that extends far beyond individual achievement. As Sarah prepared to leave the hotel where her career transformation had begun, she touched the ring that hung around her neck and whispered a quiet thank you to Margaret, to David, to Emma, and to all the people who had believed in her potential when she couldn't see it herself. The journey that had begun with a lost ring in a tip jar had become a legacy of character-driven leadership that would continue to influence the hospitality industry and beyond for generations to come. Sarah had learned that character really is destiny, but only for those brave enough to choose character when it matters most. Walking out into the garden where Emma's wedding had taken place, Sarah felt the profound satisfaction that comes from a life well lived, a career built on principles, and a legacy that would continue to create positive change long after her active involvement had ended. The ring had given her everything, not because of its monetary value, but because returning it had revealed the character that would define her destiny. In choosing integrity over convenience, in believing that doing right would lead to positive outcomes, and an understanding that true success serves others. Sarah had built a life of meaning that would continue to inspire others to make their own character-defining choices. The story of the lost wedding ring had become the story of found purpose, transformed lives, and the enduring power of choosing principles over convenience. It was a story that would continue to unfold through the lives of everyone Sarah had influenced, a legacy of character that would ripple forward through time, creating infinite possibilities for those brave enough to choose integrity when it mattered most.